And so, without further ado, let's get straight into the main topics of this webinar. And let's begin with defining what are human archetypes. Human archetypes are the embodiment of certain characteristic traits and styles. Which is to say that a human archetype is a typical example of a certain person, a certain appearance, a certain role, a certain behavioural pattern that is a reoccurring theme in society, and that an archetype is a repeatable trait that we see in humans. So, for example, a human archetype would be a rock star, and that's because rock stars have a particular style, sound, expression, and behavior. Another example of a human archetype would be an airline hostess, because that is an original and distinctive role that we see repeated within the airline industry. Another human archetype would be a prostitute, because there is a certain conduct of business that is typical of a person that plays that role, and I use a prostitute as the example for its cheap shock value, and so that you are paying attention to what I say. So whether it be prostitutes, taxi drivers, bartenders, lifeguards, policemen, ballroom dancers, or a farmer, you could classify each of these roles as being a human archetype, because each role has unique and repeatable traits. They are characteristic traits with specific mindsets and behavioral patterns. Human archetypes also have desires with agendas, which means that a human archetype has the innate drive to achieve a specific outcome. There is a purpose, an end goal, a desire to be, have, or do something of interest and preference. Furthermore, human archetypes can have positive and negative traits where the behavior can result in good or bad outcomes, where the behavior is expressed with positive or negative thoughts, emotions, and actions. So now that you know what a human archetype is, now let's explore who are the 12 human archetypes. And before I introduce these 12 human archetypes to you, I need you to know that it has taken me over 3 years of extensive research, study, and contemplation in which to become aware of and define these 12 human archetypes. So, drum roll please. Here are the names of the 12 human archetypes. We have the fantasist, the escape artist, the false victim, the sadist, the defeatist, the exhibitionist, the thrill seeker, the trickster, the imposter, the jester, the sycophant, and the perfectionist. Now, the names of each human archetype that I have just listed epitomizes their main characteristic traits. And so by their archetypal names alone, you already have a good idea of what the main characteristic trait of each archetype is. For instance, the fantasist archetype is the characteristic trait of fantasizing. The escape artist archetype is the characteristic trait of escapism. The false victim archetype is the trait of falsely acting like a victim. The sadist archetype is the trait of being a sadist. And the defeatist archetype is the trait of defeatism. And so on and so forth. And if you are new to these 12 human archetypes, if you are unfamiliar with the psychology of what it means to think and behave with certain archetypal traits, then don't worry, because over the next few slides, I will bring you up to full speed on what it means to act with archetypal traits. So let's move on with, why do you need to learn about the 12 human archetypes? Well, there are two hugely important things that you need to know, that you truly need to understand about these 12 human archetypes. And the first one is that they have self-abusive traits. Now, what do I mean by self-abusive? It means that these 12 human archetypes are the reason that we engage with bad, immoral, toxic, depraved, sinful, and degenerative habits. They are the reason that we consume and do things that degrade the quality of our life, in that we become poorer, weaker, slower, deficient, disordered, incapable, infirm, and diseased. Secondly, the 12 human archetypes have self-sabotaging traits. This means that we deliberately limit, restrict, obstruct, avoid, damage, or destroy even an aspect of who we are and what we do. And self-sabotaging behaviours are what prevents personal growth and lifestyle development. And so, with the 12 human archetypes, we are talking about negative traits that result in personal and other harm, loss, and injury. And so, to summarize this part of the presentation, the 12 human archetypes are why you engage with self-abusive and self-sabotaging behaviors, where you are doing certain things or not doing certain things that results in some type of harm, loss, and injury. And if you look at some areas of your life, this would be immediately obvious to you. There are some areas of your life where you engage with self-abusive and self-sabotaging habits and behaviors. And there will be parts of your life where this is not so obvious. But as you become more aware of the negative traits of the 12 human archetypes that I present to you in this webinar, it will become obvious where you are unknowingly self-abusive and self-sabotaging, which brings us both to the next slide. Why do you self-abuse and self-sabotage? Because think about it, self-abuse and self-sabotage, they result in negative consequences that cause suffering. So why would you cause harm to yourself? Why would you put yourself in harm's way? It's because of A, you lack self-control. That's because the 12 human archetypes are autonomous, impulsive, reactive, and involuntary traits, which means that these archetypal traits act on autopilot mode without you being able to control their behaviors. When acting out the traits of an archetype, you are like this robot that follows the commands of a pre-programmed operating system. And B, you lack self-awareness. These archetypes are unconscious traits, which means that you act without being aware of what you're doing or why you are doing it. Now, that might not make immediate sense to you because you're a conscious being that knows what you're doing at all times, right? Wrong. Roughly 95% of what's taking place in and around you, you are unconscious of, you are unaware of. You see, the unconscious aspect of your consciousness is the largest and most powerful part of you. The unconscious aspect takes care of all your body's operations like breathing, blood circulation, food digestion, and the heart pumping blood. And it does all of these important functions to keep you alive, even though you are unaware of them taking place. So for example, you are unaware of your breathing until you place your conscious attention on your breathing. So focus on your breathing right now and you will have just become aware of it. Whereas before I mentioned breathing, you wasn't consciously aware of it in this moment. Here is another little experiment to help you distinguish the differences between the conscious and unconscious aspect of who you are. I want you to now focus on this logo on the right side of the screen that says play to win, because that's why you're here with me today. So really narrow your focus onto that logo and concentrate on reading the words play to win. Now this would be you engaged with your conscious awareness. You are consciously aware of the logo. Now I want you to stay looking at the logo and reading the words, but now start to defocus your attention so that you include your periphery vision. And you should notice that the rest of the room that you are in will come into the awareness of your vision, where you are now aware of both the logo and the entire room that is within your periphery vision. Now I want you to realize that whenever you are directly focused and concentrated on an aspect of reality, at the same time, you are unconsciously experiencing the periphery vision of that reality. You are experiencing roughly 90 to 95% more of reality than the reality that you are focused on and aware of. And because we all have a conditioned mind, where 90 to 95% of the mind is programmed to think and behave autonomously, just like our breathing and our heart operates automatically. When you are repeating conditioned thoughts and behaviors, you are unconsciously expressing your thoughts, words, and actions. Just like you are not aware of your breathing until you focus on it and observe your breathing, the same applies with conditioned mind, that you are not fully aware of what you're thinking, then speaking and doing, when you are not focused on what you are thinking, speaking and doing. You are not fully observing yourself, you are just a passenger of your actions, an unconscious passenger. And if this does not make absolute sense to you just yet, it will begin to make sense as we move through this webinar. So stick with me. But let's just finish this slide by saying that you can't control that about the self to which you are unaware of about the self, where the lack of self-control is the result of a lack of conscious awareness, in that you lack awareness about the self. You lack the awareness of why yourself thinks and behaves the way you do, and you can't stop something from happening when you don't know where, when, and how it happens. And this is why gaining self-mastery over the unconscious traits of the 12 human archetypes is so crucial for you, because that which you have not mastered about yourself is a part of yourself that you are a slave to. The unmastered parts of you are without temperance, constraint, free will, and virtue. And most people have not yet mastered the unconscious traits of the 12 human archetypes, which is why they experience a self-abuse or self-sabotage that they have no conscious control over. So, exactly how do the 12 human archetypes control your psyche? Well, they are sub-personas with sub-attributes, which means they are subconscious, they are substitutions, they are substandards, and they are subversions of who you are. And right now, we are going to explore exactly what all of those terms mean. And let's start with, what is a sub-persona? Well, a persona is an aspect of someone's character that is presented to others and that is perceived by others. Where you would have this overall persona, a specific personality, a social face that you present to people. Whereas a sub-persona is a part of that overall persona. The sub-persona is a smaller piece, a fragment of the main persona. And the 12 human archetypes are individual sub-personas. They are unique and separate characteristic traits, which means that the whole of you consists of different parts. You have different parts that make up the whole of you. Your overall character is a combination of different characteristic traits. Now, each sub-persona operates with 4 distinct attributes. They are subconscious. The 12 human archetypes are subconscious traits of the conditioned mind. The conditioned mind is your learned behaviours and habits. You are conditioned to be autonomous, involuntary, repetitive, and reactive. And roughly 95% of who you are is subconscious conditioning. This means, for the most part, you act on autopilot mode. You are unconscious of your subconscious conditioning. You are mostly unaware of what you do and why you do it. Unaware means that you are not awake to and not aware of certain aspects of reality. Instead, you are engaged with and being directed by the thoughts and emotions of your conditioned mind. And with the next slide, we have, they are substitutions. Each of the 12 human archetypes is an alternative trait. They are alters, which means that you switch from one characteristic to another, where the characteristics of one archetype is replaced with another. This change in character affects your behavior in a small but significant way. So, for example, you could be the fantasist archetype in one moment, where you are fantasizing about something, and then in the next moment you have switched mindsets and you have altered your characteristic traits to become the escape artist archetype, where you now have a strong urge to escape from something. And these 12 different archetypal traits, they switch on and off. They alternate when they are triggered by key stimulus and cues. And these key stimulus and cues are both internal and external. Next, they are substandards. Each of the 12 human archetypes can be lower self traits that are prone to inadequate and unworthy standards of behavior, where there is poor thinking and behaving that results in a poor quality lifestyle, where you pursue low values and degenerative experiences, where you do things that are below par, where you cut corners, never start things, never finish things, never get better, where you do as little as you can to get as much as you need, where you live within a world of less, lack, and laziness, where you never actualize your highest and fullest potential. They are subversions. Each of the 12 human archetypes can compromise your true nature. They are devious and deceptive traits that can undermine your authenticity, honesty, morals, integrity, honor, and virtue, which puts you on the dark side of the force, which takes you down the dark pathway in life, which results in you cultivating life experiences that violate who you really are, and where you create a life that leaves you unfulfilled and wretched. So pretty dismal stuff. Moving on. How do you experience a sub-persona? How do you experience a human archetype? Well, you are triggered by stimulus and cues. These triggers are internal and external. They are environmental and situational. So the internal stimulus would be that you are triggered by a memory, thought, emotion, or feeling. The external stimulus could be that you are triggered by what someone does or says. You would be triggered by your senses, what you see, smell, hear, touch, or taste. You would be triggered by a particular event, situation, or environment. And both the internal and external stimulus and cues are interrelated. One triggers the other. So, for example, you could see someone do something out there, which then triggers a memory within you, which then triggers one of the archetypal traits. And because the 12 human archetypes are part of the conditioned mind, you are primed and programmed to be highly reflexive and reactive to both the internal and external stimulus and cues. Which brings us on to the state shift. When you experience an archetypal trait, you shift psychological states, which means that your desires, thoughts, emotions, and agendas change. Your mind and body shifts into a different energetic state. And to give you an example of what that is like, a state shift is what happens when we feel hungry and get the impulsive urge to eat food. The mind and body is utterly possessed and triggered by nothing else than strong desires, vivid images, and suggestive thoughts that are fixated upon the what, where, and the when will I eat. We are driven towards obtaining food, where getting food is the main focus, the attention, and the desired outcome. And once that desire has been satisfied, in this case you have eaten, your mind and body then shifts into a different state and moves on to the next task. And we do unconsciously flip between different states of mind and behaviours without realizing that we do. State shifting is a normal de facto of life. We often shift into altered characteristics each time that we engage with different tasks and role plays that require a different mindset and skill. We often become a different person for one moment and situation to the next. And next, the 12 human archetypes are all conditioned to be within a pain to pleasure cycle. When triggered by a stimulus and cue, you have this reactive need to escape from a psychological or physical discomfort and seek some type of pleasurable relief. And those discomforts are usually associated with some type of fear, insecurity, trauma, and shame. We're talking about the fears of loss, harm, rejection, embarrassment, etc. The insecurities that we have about our looks, our abilities, our performance, our inferiorities. We are talking about the past traumas where something shocking and hurtful happened, which is now being triggered by a present day situation. And we are talking about the shames that we feel over the things that we've done, or the shame that we have about the things that make us feel unworthy, regretful, disgusted, and lesser. And these psychological and physical discomforts will become apparent to you as you explore the individual profiles of the 12 human archetypes. Now, for timekeeping purposes, I won't be able to explore all of the 12 human archetypes in this one webinar presentation. No kidding, it would take me a whole day to outline the different profiles of each of the 12 human archetypes. So in this webinar presentation, I will present to you the profiles of 4 of the human archetypes. I will explore with you the fantasist archetype, the escape artist archetype, the defeatist, and the imposter archetypes, where I will get straight to the most important points of each archetype. And if at the end of this webinar you are interested in learning about the other 8 archetypes, then there will be an opportunity for you to do so. So in this webinar, we are going to explore 4 of the 12 human archetypes.